Hello, everybody. My name is Stephen Brookfield, and I am giving this presentation at the invitation of Edita Schlunsky, the International Learning Society, ENNEA, and the Department of Pedagogy in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Zagreb. So I'm going to talk about how critical reflection is central to doing good work as a teacher. For me, it's a foundational assumption of good practice that we need to be critically reflective. And by that I mean we need constantly to examine the assumptions that we operate under as teachers to make sure that those assumptions are as accurate and valid and contextually appropriate as they can be for a particular situation. I think most assumptions that we have as teachers, it's not that they're right or wrong, it's more that their accuracy changes from context to context, from situation to situation. What does it mean to be critically reflective? Well, it means that we examine our practice through 4 available lenses. The first lens is the lens of our own students' eyes. The more that we can see the classroom through the eyes of our students in all their difference and complexity, the more we're enabled to take actions that are really going to be useful in helping people learn. A lot of my practice over the years has been based on assumptions that I learned from my professional culture or that senior teachers told me were accurate. And it turns out that sometimes they were accurate, but sometimes they were just not appropriate for a situation. So the first lens that we use is that of students' eyes. We try and collect data from students whenever possible anonymously and in real time so that we can see what's happening in the classroom from their perspective, from the student's perspective. So I will these days often use a social media platform like Today's Meet. I used to use quite a lot. Backchannelchat.com I used a lot, and these days I use Slido, SLIDO.com. And often in the middle of a session that I'm running, I will pose a question to the students like, what is the most important point that has been made in the last 15 minutes of discussion? Or what question is bothering you about something that somebody said in the last 15 minutes of discussion? I'll ask this question live, but instead of asking people to speak their response, I will tell them to post their response anonymously to slido.com, SLIDO.com. And in about 90 seconds, I will have a set of anonymous responses from students concerning questions they have, understandings that they're gaining from the material, and so on. So that is a great way to get immediate feedback on how people are understanding the session. If I'm trying to make students aware of dynamics of oppression, of racism, of exclusion, I will say, what is the most exclusionary action I've taken in class today? Or how have I ignored some perspectives in class today? Or in what ways have I enacted white supremacy in class today? And I'll pose that question over Slido, give students 90 seconds to respond, and then we'll see what they say. I will bring all the responses up on the screen. And it's a great way of being able to deal with contentious issues that often students are reluctant to talk about. But if they are confident that their responses over social media are really anonymous, then they are much more likely to be truthful in uncovering some oppressive or problematic dynamics in any class that I'm teaching. So I do believe that constantly reviewing what you do through students' eyes is an incredibly important part of being critically reflective. I also do an anonymous evaluation once a week where I ask students to reflect on the times as learners when they've been most or least engaged, the times when they were most puzzled, the actions that were most helpful, or most affirming, those kind of questions. And then I review those once a week, and at the start of the next week, I give a report back to the students on what I've learned. So I think of the different lenses available to me as a teacher, students' eyes has been the most important. However, there are other lenses. The lens of colleagues' perceptions is very important. I love to team teach, to have a colleague in the room with me who can observe what's going on, where we alternate leadership, where we debrief together the events that have just happened and the meaning that we take from them. And I find it very helpful to have a colleague let me know their perspective on what's happening in the class. I will often leave a classroom feeling like I didn't do very well or I missed a good opportunity. But my colleagues will often point out to me things that went well that I had missed, for example. Or if we have a problem in the class and I'm not really sure how to deal with it, they can often chip in the moment with a different solution, or they can help me analyze it afterwards and prepare better for next time. The third lens is the lens of our autobiographical experiences as learners and as teachers. One of the things I like to do as an educator is to take a course regularly where I'm in the role of learner, and then as the course is proceeding, I watch the things that are helpful to me. I watch out for things that are getting in the way of learning. I monitor my own emotional reactions. I observe what it is the teacher does that I find builds my confidence, or what it is teachers do that are intimidating or humiliating or create a barrier to my learning. So I think that's also an important lens. And the final lens is the lens of research and theory. I've found research and theory to be incredibly helpful over the years, particularly on understanding the role of power in the classroom. The power dynamics between students, the power dynamics between the teacher and the student, and also what counts as an effective use of power by the teacher. Because I do think one of the things that I've realized is that in a formal educational setting, I always have power. And so I need to be aware that I'm using my power in a way that is empowering, that gives students confidence, that increases their understanding, and gives them the sense that they're being treated as adults respectfully as adults. So I thought maybe it would be a good idea to give some very specific examples of how my practice has changed based on what I've learned, particularly from students, using that first lens of students' eyes. One of the things that I've realized over the years is that the more autobiographical examples I bring in to the class, the more it engages students. Now, these examples have to be appropriate. They have to be linked to the learning that's happening. But if they are, it's what students will remember. They will remember a personal story, a personal anecdote, an example from your own experience. It could be an example talking about the first time you came across a particular concept or the first time you tried to enact a particular skill. But I noticed over the years from social media and from critical incident questionnaires that whenever I gave a brief autobiographical example, it was usually mentioned as being helpful. So over the years, I've deliberately changed my practice to begin with my autobiography. So if we're moving into a complex concept like hegemony, and hegemony is the process by which you embrace ideas gladly and willingly, thinking that they're good for you, but in fact those ideas are actually harming you and serving the interests of people who don't have your own interests at heart. Now that's a difficult concept to get across. So I will usually begin with an autobiographical example of how hegemony plays itself out in my own life. And for me as an educator, the way that has happened is that I will strive to be available 24 hours a day for students. I will work doubly hard. I will make myself exhausted. I will come home at the end of the day completely tired with no energy left for anything. And instead of complaining about it, I'll say to myself, that was a good day's work. I did well today. I showed students I was a really committed educator. And I would give myself a pat on the back and say, well done, Stephen, for coming home exhausted. That is an example of hegemony in action, because if I'm willing to exhaust myself and do the work of 2 or 3 people, be available 24/7, every day, all day, answer emails immediately, answer text immediately, and so on. If I do that, I'm basically doing the work of 2 people or maybe 3 people. And so the institution that's employing me is really benefiting from my sense of vocation and commitment. So again, just to recap, the use of autobiographical examples is something that's come particularly from critical reflection for me. A second example would be my tendency to be self-deprecating. That is to tell students, well, I'm not really that good. I make a lot of mistakes. I won't have all the answers. And in saying those things, I tend to think that I'm relaxing students and putting them at their ease. But I found out from critical incidents and social media that if I say those things before the students know me, all that happens is they get more nervous and worried that they're being taught by someone who isn't really qualified, who isn't competent to do it. So now I realize that the timing of those kind of statements is really crucial to me as a teacher. A third example would be my realization that for students, a well-planned small group activity is probably the time that they are most engaged as learners. Now, there's lots of activities out there in small groups that are not well planned. And the students know that, and they feel that they are just being engaged in busy work just for the sake of being in a group. So I like to use small groups, but I realize that a small group has to be really carefully planned and set up so that the small group task contributes to students' understanding. And when it comes to helping students think critically, which means realizing that there are different perspectives on every issue, that there are different ways of understanding something, different viewpoints and experiences that people bring to understanding something or doing something. The best way to teach that is through small group work. So if as a teacher I'm concerned with critical thinking, I've realized that a well-planned small group activity is crucially important. The fourth thing I've learned from critical reflection that has impacted my practice is how important it is for me as the teacher to model everything that I ask the students to do, to demonstrate it first, to show them what it looks like. And again, this is particularly important with critical thinking. If I'm going to ask students to think critically about something, then I need to show my own engagement in critical thinking about myself. So, for example, if I'm doing a workshop that is focusing on racism, one of the things I have to start by doing is looking at myself, is talking about the way that I've learned a lot of racist ideas, racist instincts, racial stereotypes, and how that part of me is constantly coming to the surface, and how important it is for me to try and be aware that that's happening and to take steps to prevent it coming out into the real world. I'd say the next insight is the importance of authority. One of the things as a teacher that I began my career with, one of the assumptions that I held initially, was that it was important for me almost to be invisible. That in helping students learn, it was best if they took complete control and I really said nothing or did nothing. I was just a silent facilitator on the sidelines. And I've realized that that might be appropriate in the community action projects that I've been involved with. But in a formal setting where there is a clearly identified teacher and you're working in an institution of education, students will always assume that you have power. So what you need to do is to keep checking that you're using your power wisely to help students learn, and that you're giving them a sense that they're being taught by someone who has justifiable authority. Paulo Freire talked about the difference between being authoritative and exercising authority. And he said all teachers need authority. They need to give students the sense that the students are in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing and has a lot of experience. And one of the things that I've realized is most helpful in creating students' confidence in my authority is the extent to which I will respond in the moment to unexpected questions or unanticipated criticisms. The more that I deal well with criticism, listen to it carefully, don't get defensive, the more that I'm able to respond appropriately in the moment to an unexpected question that takes me by surprise. If I can do those things, students' confidence increases. That means that for me as a teacher, one of the things that I have to do is create space for questions and for criticism. And that brings me back to where I started with the student's eyes, the lens of the student's eyes. I will use anonymous social media in the moment to ask students to critique me or to pose questions, and I will keep checking that media and I will respond in the moment. And if someone is critical of me, I try not to immediately justify what I did or tell them, oh, you didn't really understand me. I try instead to listen to the criticism, to consider it seriously, and then respond to it. However, it's important in this regard to note that sometimes as a teacher who is moving into problematic, contentious, and difficult areas around the dynamics of oppression, you will get criticized for things that from a student's point of view are justifiable, but that sometimes you need to hold firm. You need to stay true to your agenda. For example, I get many students tell me, we don't have racism in our institution. We don't have sexism in our institution. We treat everybody fairly. Other places might be like that, but we're not. So we don't need to look at this in class. We don't need to study this because it's not relevant here. When I get a lot of students saying that, I have to say, well, I understand why you might think that, but I am going to stick with teaching this because from my judgment and in my experience, we are often not aware of these dynamics until someone has brought them to our attention and forced us to really focus on them. And that is my role as a teacher of critical thinking. I need to bring uncomfortable realities to your attention and not to back down or stop doing it when you tell me you don't like it or it's not necessary. It's my job to keep the focus on this. So sometimes when you're getting feedback from students and let's say a majority tells you we don't want you to do this, you do have to just stay true to your agenda. You have to explain it and re-justify it, but you don't always go with the majority student opinion. The last point I would make is around the importance of letting students know why you're doing what you're doing. I found from students' data that the more that I explain to them why we're doing a particular task, the more I explain why an assignment is designed the way it is, the more I explain why this is going to be the question that we're going to discuss in small groups, the more I justify why I chose this reading or this video over other possible readings or videos. The more I do those things, the more the students feel respected and the more they feel confident in my own ability as a teacher. And I think for very young teachers who are in their first or second year and don't have a lot of experience behind them, the main way that you build credibility is letting students know that you're really thoughtful and intentional about all the different decisions you take and all the ways that you plan their learning and all the different techniques and activities that you use to help them understand the material. So I'll finish by saying that to do good work as teachers, we need to be critically reflective. We need to know that our actions are based on accurate assumptions about how students are learning and what will help them learn the best. And we also need to know that classrooms are a lot more complicated than we imagine. Students don't all learn in one way. They don't all respond to a particular exercise in a certain way. And over my career, that has helped me realize that actually I have a lot less control over classrooms than I used to think I did. I used to think that I could engineer student learning, that I could plan a curriculum, design an assignment, create an evaluative rubric, and all those things would lead to certain outcomes or consequences. Now I realize that I really have very little control over a lot of what goes on in class. And for me, that's been an insight that has been very helpful to me, and that I try and tell teachers new to the profession. Don't overestimate the influence that you have. Don't assume that if a class goes well, it's all because of you, or if a class goes badly, that it's all because of you. What happens in class is largely determined by students' previous experiences that they bring into the classroom with them. So I'd like to thank you for listening to my reactions and comments. I have a website, which is my name, stephenbrookfield.com. If you would like to contact me or ask me questions, you can email me directly from my website, stephenbrookfield.com. I would like to thank the Department of Pedagogy, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Zagreb for inviting me to do this, and in particular to Edita Schlunsky for inviting me today. Thank you very much, everybody.